Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Ripple Intent podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Grant, and with me, as always, is Kyle Mishkowski. Kyle, say hi.
Hello, good to see everybody.
If you're new to the podcast, Ripple Intent is a nonprofit organization helping people to become better people, better teammates, better leaders, and we love doing several things with the podcast. One of them today is we're just going to lead right into our guest because, guys, I get excited every single time we have guests on. I love everyone that we have. I love our conversations. And so our guest today, we got to know her a few years ago. We've actually worked together in the construction industry. And it's been fascinating having conversations, watching her career grow, moving into positions of leadership. And so now, sort of hitting that early to mid career leadership trajectory and seeing how that's shown up and how that's impacted her. And we even had her come in and talk at one of the Ripple Intent symposiums and share her story a bit. So we'd love to welcome today Sierra Horton. So Sierra, introduce yourself for everyone.
Hey, Jon, Kyle, good to see you guys. My name's Sierra Horton. I currently work for one of the acronym organizations in the public nonprofit sector. Before this last transition, I was working for general contractors and had done that for about 8 years before making this transition. So it's exciting for me to have kind of changed from the contractor role to more of an owner role. And that has brought with it kind of a lot of reflection. It took a lot of reflection to get to that point, and it's been a really enjoyable transition. Outside of that, I run ultra marathons. I do a little bit of pottery. I enjoy time with my husband. We just bought a house, so lots of projects. And that's been a lot of fun. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm not keeping up with you on the ultra marathons, but I'll wave. Right, as you run by, and then I wait another 24 hours until you show up again. So yeah, no, that I really appreciate that you're here. Like I said, we've had some really fun conversations as you've kind of navigated through your professional journey. And I think you have a really interesting story about how you've kind of made it here, right? Because construction wasn't where you were trying to go.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
right, and you've just kind of landed here, and from my perspective, have been quite successful in your ability to reflect and learn about how you're navigating the world and what does it mean for you to progress here. So I'd love if you could just kind of share a little bit more about your background for our listeners about, right, more about how you kind of got to this point and got in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I was born and grew up and I grew up in St. Louis. And then I had a pretty challenging decision for school. I really wanted to be in neuroscience and, got into NYU and thought I was going to go there. But the cost of it, when I looked at taking out student loans and that sort of thing, didn't fit with what I wanted. So I went to a local state school in Missouri and got a degree in psychology in about 3 years. And then I graduated, immediately moved to Colorado because this is where I wanted to live. Thought that with a college degree, like I would just get a job that would pay well and have benefits. And about 6 months later, I got my first job. It was in sales. I was at a call center. It was kind of brutal and I did not enjoy it. It was not very intellectually stimulating. And so I ended up having a conversation with a friend's roommate who owned a construction company. And they were like, I can't teach you character, and you have that in abundance, but I can teach you construction. Why don't you come work for me? And I kind of said no initially. I was like, what I know about construction is men in hard hats whistling at women walking by. Like that's what I know and that's what it looks like. And I don't want any part of that. And he assured me that he would show me a different side, that commercial construction was a little bit different than residential, and that there were a lot of, like that was not representative of what was in this industry. So I did like a ride along day with him and kind of went to job sites and went to some of the supply houses and met the superintendents and the project managers and learned a little bit more about what was possible and decided to take the leap. And stayed with that company for 7 years, 6 years, 7 years, from project coordinator to an assistant project manager to a project manager. And they were a smaller company and I wanted to do bigger projects. So I moved to a different contractor to do some larger work to build my portfolio and to see if it was the same. And it is. Like, small projects take just as much work as the big ones, sometimes more, with a much more limited budget. But I got the opportunity to do some big, really cool projects and was very excited about that. And then I got super burned out and said, I need more work-life balance. I need to see something that's more sustainable for me because I want to build a family. I'm hitting that part of both my career and my personal life where I just needed to find something that I felt I could balance better. And some of that was a lot of introspection into kind of why I drove myself so hard for so many years, and what my values were and what was important to me. And then also kind of where my fatal flaws were, maybe being so worried about something not going right that I would overextend myself to make sure that a project was successful. Like, I wouldn't let other people fail. And that's a huge burden, and honestly not something that anyone's responsible for. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here and I'm talking to you today.
Where did the owning other people fail come from?
I think it was that for me, as a project manager and as a lead of a project, right, if anyone on my team failed, I felt like it was a reflection of me and that meant that I was failing. That, everything had to be successful and going smoothly because it was a reflection of the quality of the work that I could do, the basically of me doing a good job. If something had gone wrong, that was on me. And it was an over ownership, I think, of the process. And it takes away people's autonomy. And I think it also kind of takes away from the fact that, like, you have to make mistakes to learn things. Everyone does, and you can't just rush in and save the day and expect somebody to learn from that and grow from that. And you take away from their opportunities to develop as well. So that was kind of, I definitely, I've gotten some very valuable pieces of feedback from people that I've worked with, and Jon, I think we've talked about this in the past, but yeah, the unrelentingly high expectations, I've been told that I have that for myself and for others, and then I was told quite frequently to exhibit positivity and confidence and leadership. And I thought that I was doing those things, but the way in which I was coming across, because I was so worried about being perceived a certain way and I can't control the way others perceive me, was like super anxious and worried and stressed out. And that actually made people less confident in the work that I was doing.
So I'm curious, was that like something that just manifested itself in you when you were in school, or were you taught that, or did you see it around you? How did you come to the decision that this was important?
Yeah, I think it definitely started from a really young age. I think there was such an emphasis in my family, for getting good grades and being successful, and I think a lot of kids get that from their parents, right? Like, you need to get good grades in school to have a good life, right? And so I think I was very attached to positive outcomes, right? Very attached to being seen as successful, wanting to you know, win races, like my dad at one point maybe told me that I wasn't nearly competitive enough, that I didn't really have that fight in me to get through a challenging race. That I wanted to give up a little too easily. So, I think a lot of that created this tenacity where kind of because of external forces, I was like, oh, I have to be X, Y, and Z. I can't be what I am. I have to be what other people want me to be. And that's not really a great way to live your life. It works for a while. It does. You can get that validation, that dopamine rush from people kind of being like, oh, she's a rock star, like love her, you know. But you don't feel that internally. You always kind of feel like, oh, when's the ball going to drop? When's somebody going to find out that I'm not this? So when you're not living in alignment with kind of your strengths and your values, it can be really anxiety producing, where you're just like, somebody's going to find out and tell the world, and then what am I going to have left? Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I'm having a hard time just sitting here. All those gendered conversations of you're not enough, you're not positive enough, you're not confident enough, you're not competitive enough. I'm having a hard time with it right now in this conversation. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Well, she's not inspiring enough, John, remember?
that's
I did. Yeah, before we started, we did talk about this, right? Where one of the whole like, oh, I want to be seen and perceived in a certain way. I wanted to speak at my high school graduation, right? And the speech that I had prepared was about showing up because I knew not everyone was like me, right? Not everyone was going to be, top of the class or wanting to get certain accolades, but they were still graduating with me, right? Like it's the C's get degrees, your doctor could be the worst person in their med school class. So, I thought that it would speak to everybody to talk about how, like, hey, you're here today because you showed up. And that's like half of it, right? Is just showing up. And you're going to continue to show up throughout your lives and careers and in whatever you pursue. And so that was the speech that I had kind of drafted and prepared. And I gave it, and the committee was like, it's really not inspirational enough. It's kind of like the bottom, the base level expectation. And I'm like, man, I thought it was good. Like, I think showing up's a big deal. And I think too, like, you do notice when people show up for things. You notice when people engage in community or in conversations or in a meeting, even, right? Like, you can tell when somebody's paying attention and showing up versus when somebody's just clocking it in, or if they didn't even bother to come at all. Um, and so, yeah, I still think that that's important, but it might not be inspirational.
so. Where are you sitting today with those expectations, that have informed your how you've grown and you've taken a lot of time to kind of reflect and be thoughtful about things, even the whole I'm going to make sure the team doesn't make a mistake because that's me making a mistake. Like, where are you today in that journey?
Yeah. I'll say, like, I think just even today, this morning, right? I had an electrical outage that my contractor was doing and a core through a post tension slab. And I didn't go to the job site today. I said, they have it. Me being there won't make a difference on whether it's successful or not. And if they need me, they can call me. And I haven't gotten a call. I don't know how it went. And I'm okay with that because I'm assuming that it worked out and that they did what they were supposed to do, and that I've built enough trust that if something went wrong, I'd be looped in. Um, so that for me is a big indicator that I am improving because before I'd be like, nope, I need to be there at 6 o'clock when they're starting. And, even if I'm just there, it'll somehow, make it better. So I think that has, for me, been a lot of the growth, but it took a lot of time of, sitting and reflecting and thinking about my strengths and thinking about like where I'm most comfortable and what I wanted to do with my life and with my career and the types of culture that I wanted to be involved with and the kind of support for things outside of work that I wanted an organization to have. And I looked for that pretty passively. Um, and then I saw this opportunity and it felt right. And I wrote the first cover letter and first resume that I've written in 10 years, applied for the job and got an interview and, got a second interview and got the offer. And that I think built my confidence a lot that, this wasn't all just kind of stumbling upward, that I did have something to offer. And then I think too, just part of it was saying like, is this organization in alignment with what I value? And they definitely are. Their mission and the collaborative nature and the science that they do, like all of what they do is something that I can stand behind. And so that was really, really important to me. I think transitioning from a for-profit group to a nonprofit has been a huge change for me. And it's been really nice to just be like, oh, we need to do, not just the right thing, but like we need to support the reason for making that decision. And I really like learning and analyzing things and being strategic with how I move the ball forward. And this place has given me enough time and space to be able to document that. Whereas I think in the general contracting world, you're so tied to schedule and budget, and there's expectations that you need to meet. And sometimes you have to move fast and break things. And that was just not a place that I was super comfortable in.
So those of you listening, Jon is nodding right now.
Yeah, right? So you can hear it.
Absolutely. The breeze as it passes the microphone.
I'm just processing it because that's great. I love the reflection. I love, that you're so thoughtful about the process and where you are and your comfort in being able to talk about it.
It's interesting
a lot of people are able to, they're not taking the time to be intentional in the reflection.
Yeah, and on top of that too, though, there's external factors. And that's why I was asking how you formed, or what influenced you as you formed, because there are external expectations that you be the best, you be the CEO, you start a company, you always succeed, like you get promoted, like you said, every couple of years, 3 years. There's these life milestones that you're supposed to hit, and where those come from is never explicit. It's never like, here's the roadmap to life, you will now follow this and then we will judge you accordingly. It's like that. It feels like that happens, and we don't always realize that happens, but we certainly feel like it does. And sometimes it feels like that's not the roadmap for me. I'm not sure what the roadmap for me is, but this one doesn't feel right. I'm curious to know when you go back to that conversation of the guy who said, hey, you should be in construction because you have character. I can't teach character. I can teach you construction. I can get you in the industry, all those things, but I can't teach character. With that absolute, or that confidence, or him having that belief in you, why do you think it went from you will succeed because of your character to I burnt out? Sorry, the question's getting a little more difficult the farther we go, but I'm just curious. And any thoughts on that?
I think it's because when you're early in your career, at least I felt this way, and especially if you don't know kind of the path that you're going to take, right? If you kind of stumble into it like I did. When I was young, I was like, of course, like, you love me because of my character, and that's great, and that'll be enough. And I think as your worldview expands and you meet more people and they seem so confident in the direction that they're moving, or they're like, yeah, I've been doing this for 15 years or 20 years, and this is always what I wanted to do, or, I love this part of this industry, and I knew that I wanted to focus on lighting design, or whatever it might be. right? You're like, oh, I don't have that like mindset. Like I don't know where I want to end up. And I see I see the path that I'm going down, and it just seems like more stress and more responsibility. And how can I pivot? How can I change things? So I think as you find out more and you look for examples of people that have taken a different path or have stumbled upon things, that's not really what we see in the media. We see, like, oh yeah, I knew that this is what I wanted to build, and I just pursued it with my whole heart and worked Saturdays and worked Sundays, and now I'm here, and it's, I'm young still, and I have all this ability to do things. Versus people that are just kind of like, I fell into this, I showed up, I keep getting promoted and it's great, but I don't really know if it's what I want. And there becomes this disconnect and this sense that you're an imposter because you do get put in these roles, and you're put in the same role as somebody that is pursuing it with their whole heart. And you kind of go, wait, how did this happen? Can I measure up to somebody that is really, really passionate about this? And so I think there's this, comparison is the thief of joy. And there's also just this level of concern that if you weren't educated in the same way, or if you didn't follow the same path as somebody else, that you are less worthy or less, again, I think, Jon, you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but this just level of like insecurity and anxiety around this disconnect, I guess. The path that you took is different than other people's. And I think that's why it's so important to connect with other people and to hear their stories, because the more you talk to people, and you just don't have that opportunity really early on in your career, right? You're still trying to figure it out. You might not feel comfortable asking people questions about how they got there. You might not be at events where you get to hear other people's stories. But I think if you seek that out, you'll find that a lot of people are kind of navigating and finding their way slowly versus being, this is the next step.
And to go back to what Jon, you were saying, it takes a lot of reflection, but I think it also takes, in conjunction with this, I can imagine you process, well, before I ask that question, do you do a lot of internal processing, Sierra, or are you naturally talk as it comes to your mind?
I think it's a little bit of both. I spend a lot of time reflecting internally, but I also think that, and I've said this for a long time about myself, there's not a ton for me that I try and hide, like if somebody asks me a question about something, like I'm pretty transparent and honest about it. And to a lot of people that looks like vulnerability, but to me, that's kind of just how I live. And so I think because I'm willing to go there, other people are willing to go there with me, and I get a lot more out of those conversations. Because I don't have that filter. Sometimes I wish I did, but I don't. I'm willing to be vulnerable with a lot of people. And that might be something that's pretty unique for me. But yeah, so I process both ways. I would say it's probably maybe even 50-50 or like 60-40. It's pretty balanced.
Okay, so that helps because the reflection piece, I would say for those of us who either do one or the other more, so just skew those percentages just a little bit. If you're like 80-20, one way or the other, so if you're in your head all the time, you might spend a lot of time in your head and not necessarily come to a conclusion. You might just spin, you might go different tangents, you might get more information, whatever that may be. Or if you're externally processing, then you're constantly looking for that external validation, or you're just looking for conversation. And if you don't take the time to reflect or digest or process that information, you can just continually talk and while you're processing. And so what I'm getting at is, and what it sounds like really made a huge benefit for you, is that not only did you reflect internally to take a look at what's working for me, what's driving me, what's aligning with me, but then also having those conversations either at the same time or bouncing back and forth between thinking, reflecting, doing some self-discovery, and then talking to people about it, and then doing both, bouncing back and forth whenever the time was right. And I don't think that I don't want to say everybody has the luxury of that, because I don't know if it's a luxury, but it's definitely something to learn from. That if you are doing one more so than the other, that there's something to be heard here, that a balance will actually help you propel that process even without intention.
Absolutely. I think that's very true. And I will say, like, I do give a lot of credit to Ripple and the breakfast clubs and fostering kind of some of that. That's been extremely helpful, but also the relationships that I've built through that, where I talk to those people outside of those events, or, have had the courage to just be like, hey, do you want to grab a coffee, or do you want to grab lunch or something? And we can just talk, and there's no like business development aspect to that. There's no like, oh, I have something that you want, or you have something that I want, and we're going to like form a relationship and then go after a project. I think the invitations that I make to people now, I hope are pretty transparent, where it's just like, I kind of want to pick your brain about how you ended up where you are, because I'm navigating that next transition for myself.
Some of that too, I would think, right? You're kind of getting that quick reaction of the feedback in terms of how you're showing up in the world, right? Because you're very quickly able to go through, allow for a little vulnerability, right? And have some of that external processing, right? Hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking, where I'm heading, and this is how I think I'm showing up, right? And so, I mean, I've sensed that with you as well, right? So that you do kind of get that immediate feedback to then help you modulate or adjust how you are showing up relative to how you're wired and how you want to show up.
Yeah, and I guess I want to be clear, because I think we talked about like some of the feedback that I've gotten from, you know, leadership earlier in my career about like the unrelentingly high expectations and the, hey, you're not confident or positive or a leader. you know, I will say I like rejected that at first. And so I'm not like, it's not like, oh, this perfect assimilation, like I get feedback and all of a sudden like upload new version, right? Some of that feedback took, 8 months, a year to kind of process. Like at first it was a full on rejection of, nope, I don't see myself that way and you're wrong, And then it was like, oh, you perceive me that way. So there's something there, and I think it's important to balance that, much like anything else. Not everything somebody else says about you is true, but there are elements of truth to it. And so I think that's a really challenging thing to navigate when you're young and uncertain. I think it's probably challenging even as you get older. But yeah, there's something about taking what people have to say about you, and both taking it personally and not taking it personally at all. Taking it to heart and kind of thinking through it, but also saying like that's one way of seeing me. And I'm so much more than just your perception.
I appreciate that clarification, right? Because that is critical. You know, depending on however that feedback is delivered to you, what that information is, right? Well, you do have to look at it and make a decision about the validity of it. But I really like where you went in that some of it is, hey, this is this person's perception. Whether the perception is correct or not is a different issue, right? But then what am I going to do with that? How am I going to react to it, right? And again, is what I think I'm projecting, what is being received or not.
Yeah. And I want to kind of elaborate too on this, because I think this is such an important thing, that communication is really hard, right? Like in any language, it's challenging. I I remember a conversation that I had with somebody who was looking to me for advice on how to handle a situation. And they were like, I've forwarded my boss this email and they just haven't done anything about it. And I was like, have you told them what outcome you want? Like, it's really hard for somebody, I think, in a leadership role to, get information from somebody and just be like, okay, you're telling me this, but what's the outcome you want? And I think I've had things happen in my career where I thought I was communicating clearly, like I was having a challenging time with a client and I got pulled off the project. And I was like, that's not the outcome I wanted. I just wanted mentorship and coaching on how to handle this relationship, how to improve it, how to change it. But I wasn't clear on what I wanted. I just said like, hey, I'm having a hard time. And so the direction they went was to take me off that project. And that wasn't the outcome that I wanted. And I think had I been a little bit clearer about what I was looking for, I might have received something different. And so I think that's another big part is when you get clear with who you are and your values and what you want, hopefully you can get clear on your communication to others about the outcomes that you're seeking. So it's like the person that, reached out to me with her problem was like, people are not coming to me and I'm the project manager and they're going around me to my male colleague. And so she's like, I've just been forwarding those emails to my boss. And I was like, well, what do you want your boss to do? She's like, I don't know. And I was like, do you want him to step in and, write a public email reminding them that you're the project manager? Do you want him to take them aside? Like you have to figure out the outcome that you want and then ask your boss for that and see if they're willing to do that for you. And, if they are, hopefully you'll get a resolution to your issue. And if they're not, maybe you'll get their perspective on why or how you should handle it. But it's just a challenging thing. Like there's a lot of hard things to navigate that aren't related to like competency, but are related to those soft skills. And again, I think getting clear on your communication is key for some of those challenging moments early in your career.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great place to put a pin in the conversation too. That because we're running a little short on time, but I love it. That's a lot of things for us to learn, and I'm still kind of processing as Kyle's watching me nod my head as I'm listening and thinking. Sierra, I always love talking with you. Thank you for coming on and sharing where you are in your journey. I know a lot of folks in the audience can really get a lot out of your story because they're in the same place and trying to figure out where they're heading. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed talking with the two of you. And don't let Kyle get off too easy. He is also nodding his head and smiling.
That is very true. Very, very true. Thanks for being here. It was a good conversation. Plenty more to be had.
All right, listeners, you can find us all on LinkedIn. Connect with us offline if you want to learn more and come to one of our events. You can find everything listed at rippleintent.org. And we will see you on the next episode.